So I wanted to mention significance, which we sort of skipped over, and then go on from there. So let's start with 120, 8 and 9. Significance is really just another name for some things we've been talking about already, but there's so many characters now, and so many names for each one, like a Russian novel, you've got to keep track of what's going on. So significance, I take it, on 120, I'll give you my version. I think what happens is, when you get the relational totality of equipment, the relational whole of equipment, and connect it with the for the sake of which, so that you now know, so to speak, the point of having and using this equipment, because it all goes back to Dasein's identity and its stand on its own being. Then you got the referential totality in its significance for each particular person and for the whole culture, and at a level of abstraction, Heidegger just wants to talk about not its specific significance, that's always too existential, but that there is significance, that the referential totality always plugs in to for the sake of which. This is what's going on 120, where I'll just read crucial, hard stuff. The for the sake of which, and this is a kind of review, I'm reading this because it's a sentence that sums up, and I believe I read it last time too, but I'm not sure. The for the sake of which signifies an in order to, this in turn towards this, and the latter an in which of letting something be involved, and that in turn the with which of an involvement. Sum up of this, that's the structure of worldhood from what we were talking about on Tuesday. Now, he says, these relationships are bound up with one another as a primordial whole. They are what they are as this signifying, in which Dasein gives itself beforehand, its being in the world, as something to be understood. So now it's getting set up with the signifying for Dasein. Now, so we've got all that already in talking about the piece of chalk. I won't do it again as I did on the board. But I do want to say two more things about significance. It seems to me, but all I want to say right now is say one more thing about the for the sake of which you have to plug in at the end of the referential whole to get significance. I discovered in office hours that it's kind of misleading to talk about it being a role, like the teacher that I have grown up in. You can either grow up in it or assign yourself to it. Sometimes lots of people never have to grow up in one, and lots of people don't find their identity for a while and then choose it, and some, I think rarely, people just change their identity and stop, say, being a teacher and start being a politician or something like that. That can happen too. But the main thing is it's misleading to use the term your role and goal to talk about the for the sake of. I did for years. I thought, oh boy, Heidegger uses that terrible terminology. Why are you always making up these words? Why doesn't he just use ordinary words? The answer is usually because they're misleading, because they're corrupted by the tradition. It's very good exercise in reading Heidegger to try to find ordinary words. I haven't said this already, have I? You're heard this already. Look. Okay. It's very good practice in reading Heidegger to do what I can't help doing, trying to find good old common sense words for what he's talking about. But if you can't, and then use them like role and goal, and then you gradually discover why they don't work, and you end up having to use his own weird, clunky terminology after all, for the sake of which. And that's what happens here. Sometimes it's the opposite, by the way. I love what we're going to talk about today, familiarity. That's a good old term. In German, Vertrautheit. It's all over the place. It's not a fancy Heidegger jargon, but it's exactly what he wants to talk about. But not so much the for the sake of which. What is that? Well, why not call it a role and a goal? Well, because a role is something with which you're not identified, with which you can put down. You can play the role of the smartest student in the class or something like that, and then you can get tired of that role and start playing the role of the most helpful student in the class or something like that. Roles and the roles are like in plays. I mean, you've got different role in every play. So for the sake of which is your identity, and you can't give it up. You can't even, I think when it's working at its normalist best, you can't even step outside and see what it is. Like the sacrificial mother doesn't see that that's her identity. What she sees is that every time she wants to do anything, turns out she ends up doing something for the kids instead. So it's much closer and more existential than a role. And why not a goal? Well, I talked about that last time. You can have a goal of being a professor and of getting tenure, but you can't have a goal of being a teacher. Because a goal is something in the future that you can realize, whereas being a teacher or a father or whatever is a job that you've got for the rest of your life, unless something very strange happens, and it's not in front of you as something you will achieve, but it's sort of in front of you in a different way. It's constantly organizing what you're doing. Okay, that shouldn't be hard, but I just have to say it. Now, we've seen that we got all that. So now I just want to say that why adding significance is interesting and important is that significance is Heidegger's move to get you to the background or familiarity, which is his word for, well, sometimes the background is the upon which, and if you want to fill out the upon which, well, the upon what? Well, familiarity, but that's going to take the rest of the day to talk about. But I want to read the place where this happens at the bottom of 120, and then we'll get on to the way he deals with it. He says the relational, in German we're in 87, the relational, where there's a lot of italics, the relational totality, that is the relational whole of this signifying, we call significance. This is what makes up the structure of the world, the structure of that wherein Dasein as such already is. Dasein, and now comes the new term, in its familiarity with significance, is the ontical condition for the possibility of discovering entities which are encountered in a world with involvement, namely readiness to hand, as their kind of being, and which can thus make themselves known as they are in themselves. I think I read that last time, didn't I? No. Okay. I'm having this deja vu thing because I've just been reading it over the last few days. Okay. Well, there's a lot packed into that, isn't there? So we did the structure of the world. Now we're going to talk about familiarity. What I need to explain is why Dasein is the ontical condition. Does that surprise you? Well, that's because Dasein is an entity. An ontical is an entity. It happens to be a very, very peculiar entity. It's ontico-ontological because it's the entity which makes every way of being, including its own way of being, an issue for it. But it's an entity, so that makes it the ontical condition for the possibility, and now comes another important technical term, discovering entities. Well, what does this entity, namely Dasein, have to do with other entities? Well, one thing it has to do with them, lots of the time, is what Heidegger calls discovering. That means coming across them and using them, or fixing them, or staring at them and studying their properties. You can do all sorts of things under the term discovering. The opposite of discovering, however, might sound like it ought to cover everything. What's the opposite of discovering, or what do you want to distinguish from discovering? Well, you want to distinguish from discovering disclosing. And that's crucial, because disclosing is really the fancy thing that Heidegger's interested in. That is, what you do when you disclose, and we'll hear more about this, is open up a world in which you can then discover particular entities with particular functions, and so forth. And Heidegger's he wants to note that there is discovering, but everybody's always known it. And it isn't going to be a big deal for him. But what's a big deal for him is disclosing. And that's the way that Dasein makes it possible that entities can show up and be discovered. So now we have to talk about that a lot. And it turns out that disclosing is made possible by familiarity. That's why familiarity is so important. I brought along Blattner's book because it just struck me that for one thing, most people don't even know how important familiarity is. And it took me, I know that it's not easy to know it because it took me, 20 years to notice it. Whereas most of these terms get defined and then used over and over and over. Familiarity comes up all the time, but he never makes a big deal out of it. It just seems something that it starts right where I was reading, and he mentions familiarity a lot in the part I'm going to read you, but he talks about so many other things too that the sort of rock bottom importance of familiarity doesn't get thematized. It does more in his lectures, and I'll be reading you bits from Basic Problems. But Blattner has a nice, as usual, down-to-earth, clear sense of how important it is on page 12. Heidegger offers an alternative description of experience. He argues that our fundamental experience of the world is one of familiarity. See, I don't think any place does Heidegger just say it. It's all over the place. But it would be nice if somebody said it, and Bill says it. He says, we do not normally experience ourselves as subjects standing over against an object, but rather at home in the world we already understand. We act in a world in which we are immersed. We are not just absorbed in the world, but our sense of identity of who we are cannot be disentangled from the world around us. We are what matters to us in our living. We are implicated in the world. The bulk of Division 1 of Being and Time is devoted to spelling out the phenomenology of this familiarity. You can see why I might want to read it. Every sentence is totally clear. Every sentence is absolutely right. I didn't go and look at all the other introductory books on Being and Time that I put on your recommended reading list with this question in mind. So I don't know how much, say, Holt or Ranthal or whatever, or Guignon and all these other people pay attention to familiarity. It'd be interesting to know if anybody if anybody comes to the conclusion that they don't even know that the X doesn't know it's important in their commentary, let me know, and I'll scratch them from the list for the next round. And if you discover somebody who thinks clearly like Blattner how important they are, that's it. Then I'll give them special support too. Anyway, it is clearly very important, and it's going to get us to something which, again, it took ages to occur to me what's going on in all this dense stuff. But on 119, he makes an absolutely crucial move. He makes it in italics, so it isn't his fault. It was just my density that I didn't see it. But so much is going on that not only is he interested in the structure of worldhood, which is what we've done up to now, but now we're getting a new issue. The phenomenon of worldhood. Now you may think, well, that's not a big deal. You can call it either one. But it's a very big deal. The structure of worldhood is this abstract structure of the in order tos and towards whiches and for the sake of whiches. The phenomenon of world is what it is to experience the world as a world. And the phenomenon of world is really familiarity. That's how it fits together. And it turns out that it's really the phenomenon of world that's more important than the structure of world. It's as if somehow the structure of world is just a great big tour de force which he brings off just to show somebody like Wittgenstein that he can do it. But the phenomenon of world plays a crucial role. Yeah. I see. I guess I see. Let me see if I don't answer you. Say it again. What he wants to know, sort of, why I sort of separating the structure from the phenomena, right?
Structure about why would it define any other way?
Oh, good. No, there isn't any other way to think about how the structure discloses itself to the phenomenologist, except by way of familiarity. But the structure is not itself this experience of familiarity. It's a structure. And now you want to ask, it's not a big deal. Now you want to ask, structure of what? Well, it's a structure of a certain way of experiencing. It is, a structure of a certain way of experiencing. And now he wants to describe that way. So you could say it's something like, how's this? I'm trying to answer you. I could tell you the whole story about structure, which I told you last time on Tuesday, and you would never know that I was talking about familiarity. It doesn't sound a bit familiar, and it sounds it's abstract, and it seems sort of special only when you're using equipment to take a stand on your being. Now it turns out that worldhood is really a fundamental kind of experience, and that's what I'm trying to add. You can't read that off structure. You've got to add that. And I think people read this book and teach it for years, as I say I did, without realizing that he's switching from the worldhood, which is a structure, to the phenomenon of world, which he's asking, in effect, how do we experience that structure? And now he's going to tell us a whole long story about that. He spent years talking about it in the lectures that lead up to being in time. More and more, he sees that it's important, and it's sort of almost got it to the point where he sees that it's crucial here in this passage I'm reading. Well, I haven't read it yet, have I? The one on 119. Okay, I'm going to read it now. This is where he introduces phenomenon of world in the middle of 119, and the German does sort of in the middle of 86. A lot of italics again. The italics here is very justified. Okay, now, that wherein Dasein understands itself beforehand in the mode of assigning itself, that is, taking up the equipment in order to take a stand on its being by way of a for the sake of, all that. That wherein Dasein understands itself beforehand in the mode of assigning itself is that, and now you got to do some heavy correcting, because I've said this, but you can't ever realize how important it is. If you don't get this vorauf hin, which is the next word in front of you, straight and translate it consistently, the way I'm translating it, you can't make any sense of any of this. Remember, the vorauf hin has got to be translated that on the basis of which, because it's very closely related to being. And remember, back on page, 25 or something, being is defined as that on the basis of which beings are understood. The bottom of page 25. So here we are, and you should say, wow. But on the other hand, this translator has switched it from vorauf hin, which is what he said on page 25, to the for which. What in the world is the for which? There isn't any for which. It's not one of Heidegger's wishes. And so you have to cross it out, or you won't understand. So now we're going to see wherein Dasein is that on the basis of which it has let entities be encountered beforehand. That's fine. The wherein of, really you should say an activity of understanding, but this is just a technical point. Act is a Husserl term, and it always mental acts. And he doesn't want this to be a mental act. But since you don't know that, you don't have to worry. The wherein of an activity of understanding, which assigns or refers itself, is that on the basis of which one lets entities be encountered in the kind of being that belongs to involvements. And this wherein is the phenomenon of world. And sort of it's very important, and yet it somehow comes at you in a mix of so many other things you don't even see it. And I guess we should go on with the paragraph. And the structure of that, again, vorauf hin, on the basis of which I think he does it even, he's got a for which in there, the translator. Now he's got a to which. Sometimes he's got a towards which. That would be enough to throw the book into the fire if there was an alternative, that there isn't. So you've got to read it, correcting it all the time. And the structure of that, on the basis of which Dasein assigns itself, is what makes up the worldhood of the world. So it's all scrunched together. And what happens really, on a sort of ground floor simple level, is the worldhood of the world, which is the structure of all this interrelated whole of equipment, has to mesh with our skills, Dasein's skills for coping with the equipment. So you've got a holistic world of equipment with its equipmental relations, and you've got, thanks to having grown up in it and messed around in it and opened doors and walked on floors and eaten with forks or chopsticks or whatever you eat with, all that, because of that, your whole collection of skills meshes with the referential whole. That is really what the phenomenon of world is. It's what you get when those two come together. At least that's how I would like to say it. So you've got a meshing of a set of skills, practices, and it's the condition, and that is the condition of the possibility of encountering a referential whole of equipment. I say that we should look at 118. So let's try. Okay. Oh, lots of heavy stuff. I don't know about your book, but my book is marked in these next these pages, starting on 116 and going on in here. Everything is marked up, and it's so dense, but it's so clear. Okay, 118, first full paragraph, 85 in the German. As the being of something ready to hand, an involvement is itself discovered only on the basis of a prior discovery of a an equipmental, a whole of involvement. So in any involvement that's been discovered, that is, to anything ready to hand which we encounter, what we've called the worldly character of the ready to hand has been discovered beforehand. And that's, I don't know why I'm reading that. I mean, it's true, but it doesn't help much. What? I don't think we've advanced much. I'm trying to find something why I'm interested in this. Well, the end of that paragraph, what I'm really doing is doing things in a bad order. I should have read this when I said discovered needs to be defined, and so that it doesn't get mixed up with disclosed, and that's what's happening here in the last sentence. It is essentially not discoverable if we, hence, that is, what is not discoverable? The ready to hand, entity within the world. Essentially not discoverable if we henceforth reserve discoveredness as a term for a possibility of being, that every entity, what is henceforth not discoverable? Let's see if I have to read this to myself. Wow, I see what I was supposed to be reading. No wonder I couldn't tell why it was important. The middle of that top paragraph, starting on the right-hand side, we're going to get the distinction between discovered and disclosed, which is what I want. And letting entities be involved so that they are freed for a totality, that is this whole of involvements, one must have disclosed already, disclosed there, that on the basis of which they have been freed. Entities get freed. It's a funny word. I have to say something about it. When I pick up the piece of chalk in order to write on the board, in order to blah, 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 I free the chalk in Heidegger jargon. Most Heidegger jargon I've gotten used to after all these years, and it seems quite natural to me. Why we would call that freeing the chalk, as if the chalk somehow is being held down and I've rescued it, is beyond me. What? I believe so. I think whenever you use anything in Heidegger jargon, you free it. Does anybody have a feel for that? Yeah. Yeah, you let it do its thing. That's what you're saying. That's what it is to free something. I got to write that down. Let it do its thing, and and it needs you to do it. Okay, now I can sort of understand when I see freed. Where were we? But that on the basis of which something environmentally ready to hand has thus been freed, that is, I've taken it up to use it, and indeed in such a manner that it becomes accessible as an entity within the world first of all. That is, that's how the chalk shows up as an entity. I like that showing up jargon. So you let it do its thing, and that is, you let it show up as a piece of chalk. So that cannot be conceived as an entity with this discovered kind of being. Where are we? But that on the basis of which, now, and not the entity, not the chalk, but that on the basis of which something environmentally ready to hand has thus been freed, and indeed in such a manner that it becomes accessible as an entity within the world, cannot itself be conceived as an entity. That is, the on the basis of which isn't an entity. That is, just keep telling yourself, the background isn't an entity. It cannot be conceived as an entity with this discovered kind of being. It is essentially not discoverable. If we henceforth reserve discoveredness as a term for the possibility of being that every entity without the character of Dasein may possess. That was what I said I should have read earlier. That just means any entity which you can pick up, remember, or fix, or stare at, or so forth, is discoverable. Dasein isn't discoverable, and the world isn't discoverable. It's because they're in the background. They're on the basis of which textbooks are discoverable, and chairs, and windows, and all that. Now, have I caught up with where I belong? Let me see. I think so. Yeah. So disclosing a world is what makes possible discovering the ready to hand. That's what he's leading up to. So now we have to go on. But what does it mean to say that on the basis of which, you see how frequent it is and how without understanding it these pages would just be hash. What does it mean to say that on the basis of which entities within the world are proximally freed must have been previously disclosed? That's what I want you to get. That's the place where he makes the distinction. To Dasein's being, an understanding of being belongs. Any understanding has its being in an activity of understanding. If being in the world is a kind of being which is essentially befitting to Dasein, then to understand being in the world belongs to the essential content of its understanding of being. We're going to come back to that at the very end of today. The previous disclosure of that, on the basis of which what we encounter within the world is subsequently freed, amounts to nothing else than the understanding of the world. The world, then I don't understand this, towards which Dasein always comports itself. I don't like that, but that isn't wrong, and the translation is right. You see, you comport yourself mostly towards objects. I don't think you comport yourself toward the world. I think the world is in the background and is transparent. I can't fix it. If anybody thinks that this is what Heidegger should say, and go ahead. Yeah.
Or in dictionary, and it said something having to do with behavior. So perhaps it's towards which Dasein has an entity always.
The behave is fine for comport, and I'll talk about that. But it's the to or the towards. I don't think you comport yourself, that is, behave towards the world. But that's just weird. If you have a sense of the world as the space in which anything is disclosed, towards which you can relate by discovering it and using it, to say that, it just boggles my mind. I don't get it. You want to, yeah, go ahead. Woo, does he have quotes around it? That would save the day, but I don't think he does. Remember when he defines world, he says, when he's going to talk about the world as a collection of objects, which you can, then he's going to use quotes. And if he did use quotes, that would save the day. Where is it? No, he doesn't use quotes. That's the trouble. Put quotes in for him. That's in that last sentence. The world, in quotes, towards which Dasein comports itself, that would be fine. The totality of entities. But it's not what he says. And there's 17 editions of the book in which he had a chance to correct. He didn't. So maybe something important is going on and I'm missing it. You always got to be ready for the anomalies, because it may turn out that what strikes you as a mistake is your mistake, that there's something important happening. I can't believe it now, but then you never can, when you confront an anomaly, believe that it's what's important till you understand how it's important. Yeah.
So I don't see why you have to comport yourself, or DOS has to comport itself towards objects. And the worldhood will determine sort of how objects appear in any case. Even if you are comporting yourself or DOS has to comport towards objects, then it's also at least probably comporting itself towards the world.
I'm not convinced. I mean, he says if it's comporting itself toward objects, it's comporting itself towards the world. That's like saying if you're comporting yourself toward the figure in Gestalt terms, you're comporting yourself toward the background. That seems to me just the wrong thing to say. It's the background better stay in the background. But anyway, since Heidegger's on your side, I don't want to make too much of a scene of disagreeing with you. Yes?
More like world,
What world in which?
The John, right? Laurie. Then I'm going towards the end suite there, but I'm also kind of importing towards the general.
Well, I mean, again, he's saying, you could consider this. When you're using equipment in a workshop, to talk like Heidegger, and a hammer. You're certainly freeing the hammer, discovering the hammer, behaving, comporting towards the hammer. But when everything's going well, the workshop's just not even, doesn't even need to be on your mind. Of course, you need to be familiar with it. And I just realized a move one could make, but I think it would make it hard to understand, that if being familiar with something was comporting yourself toward it, then we'd have no problem. Because we're going to discover in just a minute that, of course, we're familiar with the workshop, we're familiar with the lecture room, we're familiar with the world. Familiarity is a way of comporting yourself. That must be how he's thinking about it. Okay, I think that blurs more than it helps, but you have to do what you can. Yeah. What's that louder? I can't hear you. It decreases. The object withdraws when you're hammering with it perfectly. And I know what you're about to say, I think, and it's smart and interesting. And yet we're still comporting ourselves toward the hammer, even when it withdraws and becomes invisible, you might say. Am I putting words in your mouth?
Talking about the background, talking about his eating. His here is thinking all about how he's turning to be and then he doesn't even think about it. He obviously doesn't act like it. And when I take that the advantage here is experiencing advantage. As opposed to his here thinking about power.
Oh, that's a can of worms issue, because with Searle, this parking example, for instance, that you follow a rule when you're parking, and finally the rule, he used to say, and I used to disagree with him every year, I don't know whether he's still saying it, that then the rule becomes unconscious, and we're still following the rule because we know we must be, because we're still able to park, and that rule is how we do it. And I want to say, not at all. That's just exactly what Heidegger says is bad phenomenology. That when you finally get a skill for dealing with things, you no longer have any rule. And the phenomena is that the parking becomes transparent, and the car becomes transparent, and the parking space becomes transparent. And Searle has a line like that which fits this, that what you're doing rises to the level of skill. That is, something might become sort of something you're thinking about, which is namely, I don't know, how to get to teaching as quickly as possible. That's what's on your mind, so when you're doing all this parking stuff. But in case anybody was ever tempted with this idea, I'm going to take a digression and tell you what I think is a funny story that I made up once. I mean, I'm so sick of people who tell me that when you, in the old days, the expert systems people had an argument very much like what Searle used to have anyway about the rules for parking. They said when you tie your shoelaces, you once had to know a rule, which is something like over here and make a loop and through there, and of course we don't even know what that rule is anymore. So far that's good phenomenology. And then they conclude, but you can still tie your shoelaces, so the rule must be gone unconscious and still be operating unconsciously. It sounds very plausible. Been believed since Plato, but in some version. Well, it's wrong, and the way you can see it's wrong is like a joke. Suppose you say that in order to ride a bicycle, you've got to have training wheels. And only when you've got those training wheels on can you ride the bicycle. And then you ride and ride and ride. And one day somebody takes off the training wheels and you can still ride the bicycle. Well, the training wheels must have become invisible. That's the only conclusion you can get. I mean, that's what makes it you're able to ride a bicycle. You don't see them anymore. So they must be functioning invisibly. No! They're not, the training wheels haven't gone invisible. You've got another mode of processing, an entirely different mode of processing, which is a certain, and what that is and how it works, is a long story about skill. But you don't have to believe that when your skill becomes something that is transparent and the object in the skill withdraws, that it's still lurking around somewhere, implicitly, tacitly, unconsciously, and whatever. I mean, maybe there's just other ways the brain can do whatever it is that you're doing, which doesn't need that rule. In fact, it must be, because it becomes so much more fast, so much more flexible, and to the situation and so forth, once it disappears, like in learning a language. You follow rules for a while when you're speaking French, and you do it so badly, and you take so long, and you have to figure out what words to use and in what situations. And then one day, or gradually, you get so you can speak French. And then you do it quickly and without any sense of it being difficult, and with complete flexibility and adaptability to the situation. It's very unlikely that it's the same rules that you had to go through to learn French that are now operating unconsciously. So that can't be right for operating towards something. But I gave you, read into what you were saying, something close to what you were saying, which I think is a very interesting proposal. Namely, that just as the hammer withdraws and it becomes transparent, and the rules we can add that you were following disappear, so, and yet, you are still comporting toward the hammer in some sense. You're behaving in a way that's directed toward hammering with that hammer. So maybe that's the sense in which you want to say, well, and even when the world has become so familiar that it's background, and you don't notice it anymore, and so forth, and it withdraws the way the hammer withdraws, so the better you're familiar with it, the less you experience it. Nonetheless, you are coping with it, and therefore comporting toward it. I mean, that's how you have to see it. It's just a bad way of talking, because why should you not just say, well, only when you're thematizing it, you're comporting toward it, when you're noticing it. Comporting toward something, I want to say, means noticing it, taking account, noticing it, paying attention to it, acting deliberately with respect to it. That's how I would use comportment toward, but that isn't Heidegger. That's a long digression. Sorry about that, but I'm still trying to make sense of it. Let's go on. Where are we? Disclosing makes possible discovering. That's what I just read. That's the punchline on page 118. And you got to just keep it in mind. From now on, you're going to hear a lot about disclosing and not very much about discovering, which doesn't interest Heidegger very much. Now, I think, have I already read? I can't remember where I stopped reading. I read the part about discoveredness. I read, I read that all on 118 that I want to read. Now we finally get, after a lot of talk, to familiarity. He starts to spell it out, what it is, and that's on 119. You get introduced, finally, to familiarity in a nice, down-to-earth way. The first full paragraph, German 86 at the bottom. That wherein Dasein already understands itself in this way, that is, that it's the phenomenon of world and so forth, in this way is always something with which it is primordially familiar. So now you need to write down an important concept, primordial familiarity. That means absolutely basic. You can't have any world, you can't have any identity, you can't use any equipment if you don't have primordial familiarity. This familiarity with the world does not necessarily require that the relations which are constituted for the world should be theoretically transparent. And how not? However, the possibility of giving these relations an explicit ontological existential interpretation is grounded in this familiarity with the world. Stop there. That's fine. That means you can do what Heidegger did. You can describe the structure of the world thanks to your familiarity with the world. Nobody, so to speak, in their ordinary activity or in their right mind would be doing that. But if you happen to be a phenomenologist, an ontological phenomenologist like Heidegger, that's your job, to give that a kind of theoretical clarity. But and that's fine. And so that's what he says we can do. And now he's going to do it. He's going to go on and give us a whole story about the experience of disclosing, which equals the phenomenon of world, which equals familiarity. And he does it best in the lectures the year before he publishes Being and Time, which is back to the history of concept of time. Remember, the history of the concept of time is these are all on reserve in Howison Library, I want to repeat. I want to make sure they're all there. Plus, I'm going to have Heidegger in the latest Heidegger in Being in Time in German for a few people who asked me. They're all in the library. So when you need help, go look at how Heidegger said it in his lectures. He was a good lecturer. So here we are on 187 at the top. And he's going to tell it to you, and this is nice. This is so nice. Heidegger says, well, how am I going to talk about the phenomenon of world? That's just too big a mouthful and too big a phenomenon. So he says, let's do it with rooms. So for the next, say, 5 or 10 minutes, you can do the phenomenology of rooms. What a thing. No philosopher ever thought of doing the phenomenology of a room. But that's what so here we go. My encounter with the room, he's talking about the lecture room, naturally, but it needn't be that, any old room, is not such that I first take in one thing after another and put together a manifold of things in order then to see a room. Rather, I primarily see a referential whole from which the individual pieces of furniture and what is in the room stand out. Such an environment of the nature of a closed referential whole is at the same time distinguished by a specific familiarity, in italics, the only italics there. The closed character of the referential whole, this guy translates it right. He doesn't call it a referential totality. Well, sometimes he does. How funny. Okay, anyway, the closed character of the referential whole, he says, now is grounded precisely in familiarity, and this familiarity implies that the referential relations are well known. That means just another word for familiar. That means that what? That I know how to get into the room by going through the door, and as he says in one place, when I open the door, I use the latch, and I know that in the form of know-how. I just know how to go through the door, how to use the latch. I've got a whole bunch of know-how, which I don't have to know explicitly, that I have gradually learned. Heidegger's not interested in genetic story about how each Dasein, who was once a hopeless baby lying on its back, unable to cope with rooms and lecterns at all, got able to do that by crawling around and opening doors and falling off things and so forth. But when you get to be a reasonably grown-up person, you know how to deal with rooms. And that know-how is, and you can see this, something Heidegger doesn't do, but I think it would have helped if he did. Your know-how for your kinds of rooms is different than the Japanese know-how for Japanese rooms, or different from the know-how of people in the 17th century castles and their rooms. They had you have these chairs that are fixed in one direction, and you have doors and latches on the door. A funny story that brought this home to me about the difference between Japanese rooms was way, way back, I don't know, in the days of hippies, and I was in Japan with my hippie girlfriend who always had a guitar with her, and we were in a Japanese inn, and as soon as we got into the room, she whips out her guitar and gets ready to play it and pokes the handle through the wall of the room because it's a rice paper wall, and that's no Japanese kid would have grown up with a familiarity with rooms that we didn't and know that you don't poke the things through the walls. I mean, I was so embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. But anyway, and that's because that's a different kind of room, and it requires a different kind of familiarity. And maybe that helps make clear how much you take for granted, that you can lean on the wall like that, for instance, and nobody's worried that you're going to fall right through. And then there's sort of rooms where you don't know, just in case, I want you to have a feeling of the difference between them. If you're in a room in a museum and there are chairs, you don't know whether they're to look at or to sit on. And this is often, if you're tired, a serious problem. But you haven't got the right familiarity to go with that. Presumably the people who once lived in that kind of room, when they were in that kind of room, knew which chairs to sit on and which chairs were decorative. Okay, so he's going to do it all with room, and I'm going to go back to reading this now. The closed character of the referential whole is grounded in familiarity, and this familiarity implies that the referential relations are well known. Everyday concern as making use of, working with, constantly attends to these relations. Everyone dwells in them. That's a nice word for this now. Heidegger's got this word, dwelling, which means that it's again like the background. You're at home in it. You take it for granted. You don't have to think about it. You never have to make it an object for you. You just walk in the room and cope with it because you got familiarity. And on 274, he's got more interesting things to say about that. Oh yeah, that's nice. Now we throw in circumspection. I'm never quite sure what circumspection is. If I have to take the time sometime to list the various places the circumspection shows up. It's always got to do, that's sure, this much is sure, with what you take account of in coping without noticing or paying any specific attention to it. And it could be as local, I think, as the door and the doorknob when Heidegger uses it sometime. And sometimes it's big, like the room. But whatever level, the circumspection is the kind of knowing that goes with familiarity. It's a lot to do with know-how. Except know-how could be directed towards something specific. It's the background know-how that lets you know how to use something specific like a hammer. Your circumspection is what you can take for granted, the workshop, I think. Yeah, Dave. Yes, literally. Yes, except that if you just say that, I'm not sure. I think that's what it normally means. The German word is Umsicht, which is literally seeing around. But I think that it can be done without noticing anything. And the way you're describing it, looking around, makes it too much sound like when I come into the room, I notice the doors and the seats. And Heidegger explicitly says, I go through the door, use the knob, avoid the benches, sit in the seat without noticing anything. I'm just carrying on a conversation. But, in my way of reading it, nonetheless, taken for granted in the background on the basis of a skill, I can do that. So we'll have to discuss this more. I mean, okay, you take it in, right. You said something more noticey like the last time, I think. I don't think so. You have to take account of the context. Maybe it's not a big deal, but I think it's a phenomenological important thing to keep circumspection, familiarity, the background, and the upon which, all in the same box. And then it would be not looking around. See, that's the first phrase you used, but then you ended up with a better kind of thing, not looking around, but taking in. That's a good one. Taking in the context. That's sure. Somebody in that Tyler back there.
You know, you get actually judgment. Much broader than
Yeah, that's right. Seeing is not like looking. It's taking, and again, how about taking account, or what do you think? That's right. Oh, that's good. And maybe that's why I find so many different places where circumspection is being talked about. Because it's any way, I mean, I think we're working out, any way that I take account of the context, I have to say, I think, any way except noticing. I think that's, that you take account of the context in what you're doing counts as circumspection. And now maybe it'll help if I jump to reading this sort of definition of it, and you can see how close it comes to familiarity. And well, circumspection, this is the bottom of 274 of the History of the Concept of Time. Circumspection, oriented to the presence of what is of concern, provides each setting to work, procuring and performing with the way to work it out, the means to carry it out, the right occasion and the appropriate time. The site of circumspection is the skilled possibility of try that again. The site of circumspection is the skilled possibility of concerned discovering. Well, I have to make a note. They don't have a word for skill. I've said, what in the world has the translator found that he's translated skill? Maybe that's interesting. Anyway, that's brings circumspection and familiarity and the story about Japanese rooms all together. There is this taken for granted, you could say, sense of what's important, when it's important. For instance, if part of your familiarity with rooms is to completely pay no attention to the windows, except when it's very hot, at which point the windows draw you to open them. Or when it's very cold, the windows will draw you to close them. You don't pay any attention ever to the beams on the ceiling, presumably, unless they're about to begin to make noise or there's an earthquake or something. And you never pay attention to the dust in the corners. Presumably the custodian's job is to pay attention to the chalk dust and so forth, but it's not in your familiarity with rooms. So all the sense of what's appropriate to do in that kind of room with the kind of for the sake of which you've got and so forth is in this notion of familiarity. It's a very rich and very down to earth and rock bottom notion. I think maybe I've said all I have to say about that. Let me see. Well, yeah, but the punchline in a way is several things that I want to stress. And this is sort of the way I always want to stress these things. To get rid of noticing, to get rid of consciousness. You notice this is part of get rid of the subject and object, get rid of the mind and the world. Mindedness, which is a John McDowell current term, is exactly what Heidegger does not want to bring in, what I've been calling noticing. But anyway, so here are these places I have to jump way ahead. You never know where this is going to come up. On page 405 of Being and Time, line 354, page 354 of the German, the second paragraph is suddenly he says this interesting thing. Second sentence of the second full paragraph. The self must forget itself if lost in the world of equipment, it's able actually to go to work and manipulate something. That just says, don't be noticing. Don't be paying attention. Don't even be monitoring what you are doing. The more you can just forget yourself and thereby become skillfully absorbed in what you're doing, the better. I mean, I've said it before, but I think it's important to keep saying it. And now comes what I consider the punchline, which is the ultimate kind of familiarity when you stop talking about the workshop and the classroom and so forth, is the world. And familiarity is what enables you to find your way around in the world. You've got a whole set of skills that mesh with the whole set of stuff, referential stuff, equipment and all that. And that gives you a sense of familiarity. It enables you to find your way around in the world. It's on the same page, 405. And I'm always sensitive to it because Wittgenstein also talks about finding your way around in the world. It's a phrase that just seems to naturally come to mind. So he says on the bottom paragraph, there's all kinds of time talk in here because we're in Division 2, but I'm just picking out the part. He says that familiarity, see on the left, second line of the bottom paragraph, familiarity in accordance with which Dasein, as being with one another, knows its way about in its public environment. That's just another version. You can find it every once in a while coming up. Finally, what Heidegger wants to talk about is knowing your way around in the world. Okay, now, understanding, yeah, we got that. Okay, got that. Okay, now we have to introduce another terminology. I'm sorry about this, but I need to quote something which happens to be from Basic Problems. And Basic Problems, he's got a new way of talking about the way Dasein is always outside of itself in the world. I mean, I've been saying to somebody, I remember, and I never said in here, it helps to think of something from Merleau-Ponty, where Merleau-Ponty says, we are empty heads turned toward the world. I mean, you've got to get over the idea that there's something in your mind which is a representation of the world, that whole Cartesian picture. And this openness to the world is Heidegger calls transcendence, which is just a sick joke on his part. I mean, it's a crazy thing to do. I mean, it's sort of thumbing your nose at Husserl and the whole tradition, because transcendence has always meant the way you get out of your mind to the external world. The amazing thing about minds is that from Descartes to Kant to Searle, is that the mind has intentionality, namely it transcends toward the world. Now Heidegger just takes over the word transcendence and makes it mean the opposite. His lectures. That's a kind of nasty move on Husserl and hard on the students. I don't know why he does it, but he says, and here's his use of transcendence now, on 162, middle of the first paragraph of Basic Problems now, unfortunately. Transcendence is a fundamental determination of the ontological structure of Dasein. It belongs to the existentiality of existence. Transcendence is an existential concept. And now I read all that just for this sentence. It will turn out that intentionality, that's how the mind is directed toward the world, that's Searle, is founded in Dasein's transcendence and is possible only for that reason. The transcendence cannot conversely be explained in terms of intentionality. That's an important move. I just want to give you now a picture of what he's done. I mean, my commentary is wrong on this, by the way. I mean, practically everybody is wrong on this, I think. I mean, people think that the background is some kind of intentionality, that being in the world is some kind of intentionality. Once you think about it, you can see that's wrong. Intentionality is always some way that there are two kinds of intentionality to begin with. I better back up and tell you this. And because the whole way Heidegger is moving against Descartes here is got to do with, first he says, there's the kind of intentionality of noticing, of minds directed toward the world. That's what Searle does so well in his book Intentionality. And that's what Husserl does so well too. And they're similar. And then Heidegger says, but there's a more primordial kind of intentionality. Well, what would that be? Well, that's what we've been talking about. That's transparent, absorbed coping. That's using things directly to do things on the background of a world, all of which doesn't have to even have in it noticing something, where your attention, where your mind is directed towards some object under some aspect. So the first move against Descartes, and that's what I talked about last time, is to say that there's a kind of intentionality where you're so absorbed in what you're doing that the subject-object distinction doesn't work. That's primordial intentionality. But it turns out that that kind of coping happens on a background, namely familiarity with the world. And that isn't a kind of intentionality at all. That's what I didn't see. I thought primordial intentionality was a kind of intentionality. So our most basic relation to the world, which he's calling transcendence here, is an openness to everything that we can deal with, and that's what makes intentionality both kinds of intentionality. Thoughtful, deliberate coping with things of the sort that Searle talks about, which Heidegger thinks is fine but comes in too late, and something more primordial, more basic, transparent, absorbed coping. All of that's only possible once we've disclosed a world, and disclosing a world makes intentionality possible, but how do you put it? I'll read it again because it's an important sentence. So, transcendence is founded in Dasein. Transcendence is founded in. It is possible. No, transcendence. It will turn out that intentionality is founded in the Dasein's transcendence and is possible only for this reason, that transcendence cannot conversely be explained in terms of intentionality. That's because the final thing, the background, can't. Now I saw a hand up here. Somebody. Where was it? Okay. Primordial intentionality is acting on the skills, which are a whole set of skills that mesh with the referential totality. When you actually exercise some skill and mesh with or discover something in the referential totality, then that's, and if you do it in a totally skillful, absorbed way where you are invisible, remember the self disappears, and the hammer's invisible, it all disappears, and coping just goes on, that's primordial intentionality. Okay? Yeah.
What do you make of when you said things like letting?
Well, I tried. I forget, what did I say about freeing? I was happy about that. Letting it do its thing. Okay.
Which is, I wonder if it's playing off of like the Zingable.
I don't know. I don't think so. What was the... Yeah.
Letting.
Okay.
You can't describe consciousness in the same way as you did in this one, but there is a kind of...
Well, yeah. Can I just, take it in relation to what I said to him. If you've got, take a simple case, if you've got a skill for using the chalk, then you free the chalk, but that is, you let it do its thing, and your skill is what enables the chalk to function as chalk, to be chalk, and that's all you need, I think, for freeing it, and for letting it do its thing.
But doesn't that same analysis happen when you're talking about the phenomenon of the world? Is there the letting that brings into familiarity?
I don't know. I doubt it. I just doubt it off the top of my head, but we'd have to look at the text. I think it's more global. I think of letting as directed and as like discovering. Maybe they might be right. Maybe letting is global, in which case it would be freeing everything. In fact, there's a place where he talks about freeing everything. Ooh, yes. I think you're right. And it's a very, very difficult passage. Let me get to it right away, because I want to get to something else too before we end up. Where are we? Where are we going around? 119, 118. Before we get, we'll have to start with this next time probably, because it's so hard. That I just tell you where this occurs, and it's the page before I've been talking about. A page so hard that I wouldn't want to make anybody read it. But now Dave's going to make us all read it, because it begins ontically letting something be involved, this first paragraph on 117, just at the bottom of 84 in the German. Ontically letting something be involved signifies within our factical concern we let something ready to hand be so-and-so as it is already in order that it be such. So far, we're just picking up a piece of chalk. The way we take this ontical sense of letting be is in principle ontological. And therewith we interpret the meaning of the previously freeing what is proximally ready to hand within the world. Previously letting something be does not mean we must first bring it into being and produce it. It means rather that something which is already an entity must be discovered in its readiness to hand, and that we must thus let the entity which has this being be encountered. Now, I thought the next sentence might be on Dave's side. Let's see. This a priori letting something be involved is the condition for the possibility of encountering anything ready to hand, so that Dasein in its ontical dealings and so forth and so forth. No, I mean, we have to read that on our own, but I don't see anything that says that you could let the world or free the world. I thought it might. I expected it here. Where's the next sentence? Oh, let's try it. On the other hand, if letting something be involved is understood ontologically, what is then pertinent is the that's the sense I'm looking for. The freeing of everything ready to hand as ready to hand, no matter whether taken ontically it is involved thereby, or whether as an entity precisely such a sort that ontically it's not involved. That's Dave's sentence. That says ontologically we free everything, doesn't it? I think so. And that's what you said. Okay, so from Heidegger's talk, you could free everything from a piece of chalk to the world, and I wish he had, kept my distinction, namely, but you don't, it's only a question of words. I mean, nobody's denying that there's a difference between the phenomena of freeing a piece of chalk or a hammer, and the phenomenon of freeing a workshop or a room, and that second one is the same as freeing the whole world, and you can talk ontically about these specific kinds of freeing, or you can talk ontologically about the fact that Dasein's whole set of skills, all those skills that it has, makes it familiar with the whole world, and that is, now that's the new language that David said I have to use, that means freeing the world. And that's all right. The main thing is, there is a world, and it gets disclosed, and it's disclosed because we've got the skills for disclosing it. Yeah.
Between expecting intentionality, which is right for transparent coping.
Okay, yes. Oh, maybe not. I mean, I see now what you're asking, and I don't know whether I can see. Yeah, I think that we might have to talk in office hours and look at more quotes. My reading is that he calls, you're going to know basic problems. In basic problems, he calls absorbed coping primordial intentionality. And in this passage, he says that transcendence makes intentionality possible. And I take it, unless he's going to mess up, he better mean both the primordial kind and the Husserl kind. That's how I got that way. Now, I want to go back to this, okay? Because now comes something so subtle and difficult that nobody else has even tried to deal with it. I keep trying to deal with it because I think it's so important. And Heidegger only mentions it once because I don't think even he knows how to deal with it. But it's right related to his question. The question is something like, what's the relation between the holistic background, what's the relation between absorbed coping and transcendence? That's his question. That's my question. Heidegger says something very quick and deep about it. Well, what would it look like? The question is really something like this. If normally primordial intentionality is just coping with things transparently, and I see that we've been going around this issue all the time, and now we want to know what and how are we related to this whole background, and why isn't that a kind of intentionality? And if it is, and that would be the way I would think of if you said towards it and comporting about it and freeing it, you would think it would be some kind of primordial intentionality. But now Heidegger's clear, the background is not a kind of intentionality. Well, what is it then? It's a way of behaving. We behave in such a way as to free the background, right? And what else do we do when we behave in such a way as to free the background? We go into the classroom and avoid the chairs and go through the door and use the latch. And when it's hot, we open the windows. All that's a lot of absorbed coping. It's a lot of primordial intentionality. But you want to come back and say, yeah, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what kind of activity is transcendence? World is closing. Opening up the space in which anything can show up. What kind of activity is that? Well, here's the answer. It's the very same activity as absorbed coping. What else could it be than going through the door, sitting in the chairs, and so forth? So what's the difference? And I didn't realize how important and good his question was. What's the difference between transcendence and absorbed primordial coping? Well, the only difference is this. I think, though Heidegger never tells us very clearly, the background is a holistic kind of coping which doesn't have a specific goal. It doesn't have a specific towards which. For finding your way around in the world or in the workshop or the classroom isn't like a job that you complete. You notice it's got the same structure as being a teacher. The idea is there isn't any intentionality because there isn't any success conditions. You sort of, one day I finally succeed in finding my way around in the world? No, that's not how it is. It's something that's constantly and holistically organizing your activity. And that's what transcendence is. Transcendence is absorbed coping that is holistic and doesn't aim at achieving any kind of end. And there just is such a thing. I just described it. And that's called familiarity. And it only looks very deep and puzzling, and it is deep and puzzling because it's a kind of activity when you cope with things that are familiar. And it's not the kind of activity that you get when you cope in any way, primordial or any other way, intentionalistically with something specific. Or one more way of putting it, then he wants to say something. It's disclosing as opposed to discovering is a way of comporting, but it's not a way of comporting that's a kind of intentionality. But it is, sort of, because it's just a holistic mishmash of all the kinds of intentionality we've got. But because it's holistic, and you do it all at once, and you're doing it all the time, and it's never something you achieve, then it doesn't count as intentionality, and that's transcendence, or that's being in the world, or that's whatever you want to call it. It's this important, it's disclosing, it's ontological freeing, all of that. And now, Curtis, yeah.
I think that was follow the way, lots of concepts.
Yes. Absolutely. That's right. And it's good, and it's the upon which, and it's the background. And really, let's do it in the simplest way, if it's possible. It's the background. What kind of activity is the background? That's the question. Now, and Searle, for those who we want to think about it, has a notion of background, which he sort of got from Heidegger, I think, because we used to give seminars together on the background. But anyway, for Searle, the background isn't a kind of activity at all. But for Heidegger, it's just a very peculiar kind of activity, which we just described when we described the way you deal with the room, and which is different than the way you deal with the chairs in the room. But if you put together all the chairs, the windows, and everything else in a holistic way, then they're the same. Okay, let me read you my interesting punchline, which I'm amazed. Heidegger just sort of says it and throws it away. On 162 of Basic Problems, he says, just after saying that transcendence cannot be explained in terms of intentionality, the task of bringing to light Dasein's existential constitution leads first of all to a twofold task, intrinsically one. That's just what I described to you, a weird thing, a twofold task, intrinsically one. The twofold task is to describe primordial intentionality, absorbed coping, and describe coping with the whole thing, ontological. Or it's the twofold task is ontical comportment and ontological comportment, if you want. So it's a twofold task, intrinsically one, of interpreting more radically the phenomena, plural, of intentionality and transcendence. You see, and now he knows he's just said something important, because I'm going to read the rest of this paragraph. With this task of bringing to view, along with the more original conception of intentionality and transcendence, a basic determination of Dasein's whole existence, we run up against a central problem that's remained unknown to all previous philosophy. I mean, that's what he's doing there. Now, I guess I have 2 minutes, because that wasn't my punchline. My punchline that we got on 119. Now that we've discussed the phenomena of world, now that we've discussed familiarity, and now that I keep saying they're the background, they're the upon which, what coin would you expect to drop if you could follow all this amazing juggling? It looks like I've just described the understanding of being, doesn't it? That on the basis of which beings are already understood. You guys are happy about that? And he says that. Here's the bottom line of it. It just goes in passing. It's so obvious to him, I think. At the bottom of 119, about 5 lines from the bottom. German 86 near the bottom. This familiarity, in turn, he's been talking about, is constitutive for Dasein and goes to make up Dasein's understanding of being. So he's given you, gradually, through all this fancy talk of familiarity, background, transcendence, and so forth, supposedly a complicated working out and a worked out phenomenological description of the phenomenon of world, and it turns out to be that on the basis of which anything is intelligible and copable with, at its broadest, most ontological, when you go beyond rooms and beyond workshops to finding your way around in the world, that is Dasein's understanding of being. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. Yeah. Oh, great. Yes. Okay. Yes. But how quickly do I have to do this? Because I have 3 papers I'm supposed to be giving very soon.